to Tsinghua University, Beijing, China during December 2019. For carrying out collaborative research at University of Nebraska-Lincoln, he was awarded Water Advanced Research Innovation Fellow 2018 by Indo-US Science and Technology Forum and DST, Government of India. He has received visiting faculty fellowship under DAR IIT Faculty Exchange Program to visit Technical University, Munich, Germany. Dr. Ram Shankaran is presently acting as a member of Expert Committee for Capacity Building and Training on Geospatial Science and Technologies of National Geospatial Program, Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. He is also serving as an editorial board member for the journal Geomatics, Natural Hazard and Risk, which is published by Taylor and Francis. He is working as reviewers for many peer-reviewed journals such as Remote Sensing of Environment, International Journal of Remote Sensing, Journal of Hydrology, and so on. Also, he is an expert member for Geoinformatics Syllabus Committee for GATE examination. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ram Shankaran in this FDP, in which he'll be delivering a talk on remote sensing of glaciers, recent trends, challenges, and way forward. Thank you so much, sir. It is over to you, sir.
Yeah, thanks for introducing me. So I'll share my PPT. Just a minute, I'm just checking.
So my request to the participants is that whenever Dr. Ram Shankaran wants to interact, those who are interested, they can please raise their hands. Thank you.
Just 1 second.
So your presentation was visible a few minutes ago. Yeah, it is visible again.
Yeah. So good morning, everyone. So myself, Raj Ram Shankaran from IIT Bombay. So today I'm going to talk about remote sensing of glacial lakes. So current trends, means there is a recent trends. What are the challenges still persist, and what is the way forward? So before going into the presentation, I'd like to acknowledge my postdoctoral fellow, Dr. Pratik Verma, who helped me in preparing the slides. And also I like to declare that, yeah, there may be some photographs, all these things I have taken from various sources. I try to acknowledge, but still there may be some inadvertent errors, or I might have missed something also. Please accept that. So now I hope you all heard about glaciers and cryosphere and the impact of glaciers, all these things, because mostly, especially the people living in northern India, they are mainly dependent on glacier waters for the primary domestic use and as well as for the industrial users. So let's see now the distribution of glaciers worldwide to get an idea. So how many glaciers are there, or all these things across the world, all these things are. So before going to that, I'll just tell about what is a glacier. Actually, glacier is nothing but as a slowly moving ice formed by the accumulation and compaction of the snow. It may be formed on the mountains or near the polars, especially like Antarctica and the Arctic, the Greenland, all those things are. So it takes from many years to centuries to form to get compact as an ice and to become a glacier. So this figure tells about the what you can say the worldwide distribution of the glaciers. It is based on an inventory, recent inventory by called Randolph Glacier Inventory. If you see, there are the glaciers have been divided into like 19 zones. Different zones are there. Just see. So there are various zones are there like Alaska, Canada, North Canada, all these things are. And today mostly I will be focusing on the what you can say the glacial mapping, the lake mapping, all these things, especially in this zone 13, 14, 15, which comprises the Himalayas, Hindu Kush, and Tibetan Plateau and Pamir Mountains, all these things. This area, you can say, the box, the 13, 14, and 15, these areas, what are the challenges? Because these are the things which we are concerned with. Anyway, the methods, whatever we are going to discuss, will be applicable in any part of the world also. And you can see here how many number of glaciers are there here. So approximately nearly 65,000 glaciers are there in the what you can say in these areas. They are called as a combinedly called as a high mountain Asia. There are 65,000 glaciers are there, and these numbers vary from study to study, depend upon the methodology, depend upon the assumptions, depend upon the data they are using. All these things, the number of glaciers varies, and still it is an open debate which inventory is more correct. So overall, if you see, there are approximately 215,000 glaciers present worldwide outside the polar caps. Polar caps is mainly in the, what you can say in the Antarctic and Arctic. Outside that, there are 250,000 glaciers are present. And the WGI, Glacier World Inventory, they have contained information of about 130,000 glaciers and their attributes such as what is the length, area, orientation, elevation, some classification, whether it is a mountain glacier or it's a ocean terminating glacier, all these things. Let us see now what are the glaciers in high mountain Asia. If you see, the high mountain Asia means it is like subdivided into 13 categories: Himalayas, Hengdu Mountains, then complete Tibetan plateaus, Pamir, then Tian Shan, Karakoram. All these called as high mountain Asia. So they contain approximately 46,000. As I told in the previous inventory, they have 65,000 completely, and here what happened, the 46,000. Because what happened, it also depends upon the definition of the high mountain Asia. Some people, there are some variations all there. This one. So there are some what you can say inconsistencies are there, but it gives you approximately, let's say, 45,000 to 65,000 glaciers. One study by ISRO, Indian Space Research Organization, they found that only in Himalayas there are more than 45,000 glaciers are there. So that is completely deviated from other what you can say other studies. Now it contains nearly 1 lakh square kilometers of area, the glaciers only. So all these glaciers are very sensitive to climate, and it has what you can say a lot of benefits, as well as also it creates a lot of havocs to the people living in the downstream. So we need to understand what are those impacts which are coming due to the climate change. So in the glaciers in high mountain Asia, this is the split up. Okay, how much is available in the Indus Basin, Ganga Basin, Brahmaputra? All there are varying numbers are there. We will now go to the Himalayas, glaciers in the Himalayas. Himalayas, it completes mostly the western Himalayas, central Himalayas, this is, and then eastern Himalayas. It comprises, you can say, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bhutan, little bit of China. That's all, not much. So approximately 15,000 glaciers are there, and in that 9,000 glacial lakes are there within the Himalayas as per the IC mode. That is the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development located in Kathmandu, Nepal. So they have found that there are 9,000 lakes are there. These number of lakes also, it's debatable. Some people say 10,000 lakes, some people say 8,000 lakes, all these things. It also varies, what you can say, the data they are using, the method they are using, and the definition of the lake also. And also the limitations in the methods they are using. So what these glacial lakes causes? So if you see this glacial lakes, no, this is a typical one photograph of the glacial lakes. They are very sensitive to the climate change. And the glacier melt process, no, is also connected to the expansion of the glacial lakes and formation of new ones. As I told, the glaciers are very sensitive to climate change. If there is due to the increase in temperature, more melting will occur. Due to more melting will occur, sometimes we can depend upon the topography, the melted water will get accumulated and it becomes a lake over the period of time. And it's again as another reverse process also. The lakes when form the glacier form when the glacier meltwater accumulates. Again, what happens? Due to the presence of lakes, the what you can say, it increases the melting. It is a both way process. Due to the melting only lake occurs. Again, due to the presence of the lake, it enhances the melting further. That means further melting also occurs by affecting the ice flow and encourages the basal sliding, and also by changing the albedo, because albedo of the snow is very high but albedo of the water is low. That means it tends to absorb heat, and due to the absorption of the heat, then it enhances the melting process. It's again two-way connected. But the starting point is due to the climate change. Due to the climate change, the glaciers behave differently and it loses smalls, and the melt water gets accumulated. It becomes lakes and it keep on expanding to some extent, depend upon the topography. And due to the presence of the lake, again, it enhances the melting. So that's why we need to understand the connection between the glaciers and the glacial lakes. And also we need to monitor the glacial lakes. They are interconnected. So why to monitor the glacial lakes? So you might have heard about the many recent floods in the Himalayas. Not the one which happened in what you can say in Chamoli in Uttarakhand in 2021. It is not due to the glacial lakes, but the glacial lake has been formed due to the snow avalanche, snow and ice and rock avalanche. Why to monitor is, glacial lakes can give rise to a catastrophic natural hazard called GLOF. I hope you might have heard about this term GLOF. It is nothing but glacial lake outburst flood. So one example of the GLOF is like the Kedarnath floods in 2013. It claimed a lot of hundreds of people, as well as the directly lives, as well as the livelihood of the people also. This one. So this is why we need to monitor the glacial lakes, because the glacial lakes I will discuss about how it is increasing. What is the means the frequency, not frequency, that's the distribution of the glacial lakes in 1990s and 2018 and 2020 and all. So if you see, no, there will be a lot of lakes have increased, but when the lake increases, obviously the volume stored in that also will get increased. If the volume is more, and then due to any, as you know, the Himalayan mountains are prone to landslides and earthquake, all these things are. Due to that, these are some triggering mechanisms, even the snow avalanche. Due to these triggering mechanisms, it will create a GLOF, sudden outburst of the lakes. Then we will have what you can say, devastating impacts. So to avoid this, so we have to keep on monitoring the lakes. I'll just show you a GLOF, how it looks like. Are you able to see this animation?
No, sir, the animation is not visible.
Oh. Anyway. Fine. Yeah, actually it could not come. As glacial lake grows, so do the risk also grows. So for example, see this hydropower dam which are at increased risk because of the flash floods in the Himalayan region. So various studies says that the glacial lakes keep on going in the last 2-3 decades, and it is going to be growing also due to the enhanced melting process. So do the risks also. That is why we need to monitor the glacial lakes. Some of the recorded GLOF events in Himalayan regions. Among the various glaciated regions, the Himalayan regions, the high mountain Asia, especially specifically the Himalayan regions, are more vulnerable, or you can say prone to the GLOF events. So these are some of the recorded, what you can say, the glacial lake outbursts in Himalayas. And actually, it has not been. I have not updated the Kedarnath lake GLOF. This one, because this paper was published in 2009, that GLOF event occurred after this paper got published. It has happened in 2013. So past history says, because this, and there are many some unrecorded events also are there. Past history says that the Himalayas are highly vulnerable to GLOFs. So now let's see how a glacial lake look like. You can just see here, this image shows a satellite image, Landsat image taken over the one part of the Himalayas, Bhutan Himalaya, and you can see here, these are the glaciers, and this is the terminus of the glaciers, and these are some of the glacial lakes at the end. So these are the glacial lakes. So we are going to see, these are some of the glacial lakes now. So we are going to discuss in the coming slides how remote sensing can be used and why we need remote sensing also, and what are the recent trends also. It looks very simple here in this figure. I can easily monitor this, but there are a lot of challenges are there in interpretation of the remote sensing data, especially for mapping the glacial lakes. There are some lakes here also will be present, but we currently we could not identify here. Maybe because it may not be here, or it may be due to cloud cover. We will be discussing this. Let us now see what are the distributions. So far we have discussed about the distribution of the glaciers also. And in one slide I mentioned there are about 9,000 glaciers are there. Let us now see the distribution of the glacial lakes worldwide. The status based on the 2015 to 2018. So this figure tells about the map of glacial lakes of more than 0.05 square kilometers and less than 200 square kilometers during the period of 2015 to 2018. The reason why they are saying 2015 to 2018 means in some locations you may not be able to get the data at appropriate time due to cloud cover or due to the failure of the sensors or whatever it may be. So that is why they have to cover 3-year period to map the glacial lakes. So this is like a recently published work, and you can see here all these the circles represents the individual lakes, and these areas are not at all marked in red. It does not shows that it does not there we could not mark the map the glacial lakes due to the non-availability of the appropriate imageries. And here x-axis and y-axis tells you the frequency of the what you can say the glacial lakes and their area. Just see here in x-axis, this is about the longitude. Now it says that in this longitude you are having glacial lakes more than approximately 800 square kilometers in these areas, especially covering the India. If there are about glacial lakes about nearly in the terms of 100 square kilometers. You just see the amount, and also this tells about the latitude wise. So here you can say the latitude wise this is about 100. It denotes this high mountain Asia. This area we are having about more than 100 to 200 square kilometers of glacial lakes. This is the status in 2000. What you can say 18, and it is prepared by combination of various satellite data. We will be discussing about how they have prepared. So in 1990, so they have also mapped the what you can say the glacial lakes from 1999 to 19 what you can say up to 2018. In 1999 time frame, there were about approximately 9,414 glacial lakes were there, which covered 5.93 into 10 to the power of 3 kilometers square of the Earth's surface, which contained the volume of all this thing is 105 cubic kilometer. This one, the same thing in 2018, it has grown to 14,000 glacial lakes. Earlier it was 9,000 glacial lakes. In the over of like 2 decades, it has grown more than 6,000 glacial lakes have been increased. Not only the number have increased, you can see the size also. The size also increased, and obviously the volume also increased. Earlier it was 105 kilometer cube. Now it is 115 and 156.5 kilometer cube. Means I am talking about the entire worldwide. Now, how much this the total volume represent in terms of sea level rise is, if we can say that the total volume of water present in the glacial lakes during the period of 2015 to 18 is about 0.43 millimeter of sea level. If all these waters are released directly to the ocean, it may cause 0.43 mm sea level rise. And it shows that it is an increase like in there is like 0.14 millimeter sea level means increase between from 1999 onwards. How much is there in the high mountain Asia? In high mountain Asia, the number of glacial lakes are small. You just see here this figure itself says the number of glacial lakes are small compared to these areas. However, they are growing very fastly. So between 1999, 1990 and 2018, the lake volume has increased by nearly 45%. Though the number is small, but they are growing. The lake is getting expanded due to the glacier melt. It is now the total volume of lake is there in the high mountain Asia is approximately 4.6 cubic kilometer. Let's see now what is the distribution of glacial lakes in high mountain Asia. There is another study by Wang and others in 2020, very recently. So they have done only for the high mountain Asia, and they have done a detailed analysis of the presence of the glacial lakes in high mountain Asia and at different elevations. High mountain Asia is of 16 zones, subzones, and within the each zones they have mapped the glacial lakes and also at different elevations, because elevation in Himachal Pradesh varies from let's say 3,500 to 5,000. If you go to Karakoram, it is starts from 4,000 to it goes to 6,000, 7,000. In Nepal, it goes up to 8,500, like Everest, all these things are. So what is the distribution of glacial lakes at different elevation zones? This figure tells about the elevation, means the spatial distribution of the glacial lakes in high mountain Asia, as well as the elevation wise distribution. You just let us say now, this is the overall one. Let us say now Himalayas, where is within the Himalayas, this is Western Himalayas, typically covers the state of Himachal. You see here the glacial lakes are present in this zone, 3,600 meters to approximately 6,000. And in Central Himalayas also, it starts from 3,700 to 6,100. Let us go to Hindu Kush. Karakoram, yeah, you just see here in Karakoram it goes up to 6,100. All this thing, the elevations also different. So totally their study has mapped 30,000 lakes covering 2,080 kilometers square were identified in 2018. Just to see the difference between this study results and the previous study results. Previous study results show some nearly some 10,000 lakes or something, but now they are saying 30,000. If you see the difference, both are correct. The previous study, they have mapped only 0.05 square kilometer and above lakes. Here they have mapped the smaller lakes as well. That is the major differences. So when you want to compare two different studies, we need to also take into account what is the minimum size they have mapped and maximum size they have mapped. Otherwise, no, we may say that this data is wrong, that data both are correct, but they have defined their scope. Overall, if you see, the greatest concentration of the lakes within the high mountain Asia lies in the Atlai and Sian area, which occupies nearly 61% of the high mountain percentage of the glacial lakes present in the high mountain Asia, followed by the Eastern Himalayas. Eastern Himalayas represents our Sikkim. So these two are the regions within the high mountain Asia which are having more number of glacial lakes. An average rate of increase in the glacial lakes from 1990 to 2018 seems to be 15.2% there. Now, they also found where the lakes have been increased, whether it is increased, the number of glacial lakes have increased in the lower elevation or in the higher elevation. They found that most of the lakes elevations have been occurred in the elevation of 5,000 meters. And it reaches 28%, very high percentage of increase averagely within 5,700 to 6,000. Within these elevation ranges, you just see in all figures, within this elevation range only, the glacial lakes have been increased very rapidly compared to the other elevation zones. So though this is an average figure for the entire high mountain Asia, but within each region, the 16 subzones, the variations will differ. But this is the overall idea. So till now with this, what you can, I hope that you got an idea what is a glacier and what are the distribution of the glaciers, how the glacial lakes have been increased or grown over the period, let us say from 1919 to 2018, and their overall distributions, all these things. And also we have seen what are the why we need to monitor the glacial lakes, because it has it can cause the catastrophic disasters like Gloves. As glacial lakes increases in terms of size as well as in terms of numbers, the risk associated with that also will increase. So now let us see, for all these things people go for remote sensing based methods. Now we will see what are the different types of glacial lakes are there, because accordingly we have to adopt the mapping methods also. First, the classification of glacial lakes. The glacial lakes, first one is, it can be classified based on the boundary, the boundary of the glacial lake, the material which is surrounding the glacial the lake boundary. And another one is based on the glacial locations, where it is located, whether it is on the surface of the glacier or it is end of the terminus, near the terminus of the glacier, because each type of glaciers have different impact. Different levels or not different impact, different levels of impact on the glacier behavior and the associated risks also. Based on the glacial lakes, the boundary material of the glacial lakes, it can be classified into two major categories. One is moraine dammed lakes, or you can say ice dammed lakes. Then based on the location, there are three. One is supraglacial. This is on the top surface of the glacier. Proglacial means near the end, the terminus of the glacier, and subglacial means below the glacier surface, which we may not able to see. This kind of subglacial lakes are very common in Antarctica. It is not common in Himalayan regions because of the steep topography relative this one. But in Antarctica it is very common, and there are few studies are there where they have used remote sensing interferometry techniques to identify the subglacial lakes. Antarctica and Alaska regions. Let us go on the first type of lake classification. Based on the boundary, as I told, moraine dam lakes. So what happens is, it is formed based by the rapid retreat of the glaciers, resulting in the deposition of the moraine. Moraines are nothing but the debris, you can say. The kind of the materials, the soil materials which are what you can say deposited due to the retreat of the glaciers and due to some landslides, all these things. They are sometimes loose materials. As glacier retreats, the water gets accumulated in the low topographic globe between the ice front and the moraine. The moraine will act as a dam, natural dam. These moraine dam lakes are very risky one because they can break anytime sooner compared to the ice dam lakes or other lakes also. So we have to be like what we can say. Generally, these occurs at the terminus. They mostly the moraine dam lakes will be occurring in the occurring at the terminus only. They are more prone to gloughs. Ice dam lakes. Ice dam lakes is formed when a drainage is blocked by a glacier that advances or become thinner. There are 2-3 glaciers will be there. Some glaciers will advance, that is called surging glaciers, which are very common in Karakoram. So it is formed by blockage of the ice mass from the surging glacier. Then what happened? The lake growth is also depend upon the glacier mass balance. From the both the glaciers. I will just show you how they look like in a normal photograph. So this is a field photograph taken in eastern Nepal. Just see here, this is the moraine dammed lake. This is the glacier terminus. The glacier is coming here. It is the terminus. Now you just see here, there are another glacier is coming here. All these things are. You can just see here. These are the lateral moraines and the moraine complex completely. Once upon a time, maybe 30 years, 40 years before, this might also be a glacier. Due to the melting, what happened due to the topographic pattern, this is very conducive to form as a depression. They are called over deepenings. Then whenever the meltwater comes, it gets accumulated. Then it gets keep on storing. Sometimes due to landslide or due to snow avalanche or due to earthquake, the moraine will get failure and it get disturbed, and it will cause sudden release of water and causes the gloughs. This is, you can say, one such photo of the moraine dam lake. I'll just show you an example for the ice dam lake. This is in Karakoram region, because as I told, in Karakoram region only most of the glaciers are surging. Surging means that as I told that there are two things. One is glacier melting. What happened due to melt, the glacier retreats, it goes back, and in surging glaciers, glacier advances. The glacier is growing, you can say, to some extent. Assume here these are the two glaciers complex, Mochwar Glacier and the Shishpar Glacier. These two glaciers, and here these two glaciers get generally meet at this point here. At this point, what happened? The lake has been formed because one glacier is getting retreated. This glacier is advancing. Let's see here. This is the Mochwar Glacier. It got retreated, and what happened? The Pro Glacial Lake has been formed here, and this is the ice mass coming from the Shishpar Glacier. What happened? It is getting advanced, and then the ice material got deposited here, and it blocks the passage. And because of that, what happened? Due to the topography conditions, the lake got formed. And what happened? Then this ice becomes sometimes the dead ice. Then slowly that also will contribute to the melting of the melting, and then the lake size will increase. So this is called ice dam lakes. These are all, you can say, less in number, relatively less in numbers compared to the moraine dam lakes in high mountain Asia. So there are various studies are there where they use remote sensing to define the different types of lakes. One is just glacial lake mapping, and another one is classification of the identified glacial lakes also. These are all very challenging tasks. So that's what we need to know how they appear. Then only we can do proper analysis using satellite data. Another one is the second type of classification is based on the location of the glacial lakes. As I told, there are three types: supraglacial lakes, when the formation of the lakes that can happen on the surface of the glacier. The second one is about the proglacial lakes. Here the formation of the lake happens in the front of the ice, near the terminus, you can say. Subglacial lakes, its formation can happen even the underneath the ice. Mainly, as I told, it is in Antarctica region. So here you can just see here an illustration. Assume this is the glacier. This is the supraglacial lakes. After the glacier ends, the river starts originating. That means from here onwards, the melting will come, and then you can see suddenly the formation of the river, small streams. This is the supraglacial lakes. It forms on the surface of the glaciers, and this is the, let us say, the proglacial lakes, also called as moraine dam lakes. As I told that if I see in the perspective of the material which is damming the lake, it is called moraine dam lake. So don't get confused. Moraine proglacial lakes, mostly it is formed dammed by moraine. And then this is like you can say the moraine dammed lakes here. And subglacial lakes we could not, because I don't have any pictures for the subglacial lakes here. So sorry. So this is another illustration of where the location of the proglacial and supraglacial lakes. They have another term. This is the marginal lakes. This is what you can say where it meets with the what you can say on the lateral side. This is the supraglacial lakes, and this is the proglacial lakes. All these things are the supraglacial lakes. For example, it has a different impact. What happened if the many lakes are formed on the glaciers? For example, I'll show you another figure. Then in the satellite image, how the supraglacial lake looks like. This is an image taken of the glacier somewhere in Himalayas. So taken in 1989 and September 2015. Nearly 26 years gap. You just see here the same glacier. In 1989, the number of supraglacial lakes are less. Wherever you can see small patches. And in 2015, these glacial lakes, you just see here the number has grown. Many of the lakes have been grown, and many lakes become completely disappeared. Slightly disappeared means it is completely drained also, and also some glaciers have grown in size. Yeah.
Sir, PPT गिर गया है.
Hello.
Yeah, sorry for the interruption, Dr. Ramshankar.
Okay.
You can please carry
on. You can see here there are new melt ponds, and these supraglacial lakes, their appearances, all these things also very dynamic. So if you see these lakes now in 2015, maybe after 1 month, maybe once the accumulation starts, when the snowfall starts, these lakes will get disappeared. Unlike your moraine dammed lakes, the proglacial lakes. Proglacial lakes are, you can say, more or less like a permanent one. The supraglacial lakes, it's the presence will keep on changing. They are very dynamic. That depends upon the glacier melt process occurring on the surface of the glaciers and the snowfall process. The supraglacial lakes, there are like various studies how the supraglacial lake affects the melting over different seasons. If I see the image in, let us say, in 2015, in the month of June, I can say 10 lakes. Month of July, there will be 15 lakes. And again, if I go in the month of October, there will be only again 6 lakes will be there. So that will what happened now? Because of the accumulation, the lakes get disappeared, and it will be filled with the snow, the fresh snowfall, all these things. These are all, you can say, the temporary lakes. Supraglacial lakes are temporary in nature. Comparatively, that moraine dam lakes or the proglacial lakes, they are more or less permanent in nature. I'm talking relative terms. So here, just see here, this is one example of the proglacial lakes. This is based on a Google Earth imagery. So you see here, this is the proglacial lakes. This is the glacier end, and these are all more or less like what you can say permanent in nature. These lakes are more dangerous in terms of, are more prone to glass. So sometimes the proglacial lakes can be easily mapped, but supraglacial lakes are very difficult to map because they also keep on disappearing because the dynamics keeps on changing. Now let's see the role of remote sensing in glacial lakes mapping. So this is one field photographs from IC mode about the glacial lakes. From this field itself, we can just see here how difficult it will be to map this area, because these areas are not very stable areas, and going here it is very difficult, and the water is in the temperature of 1 to 2 degrees or 3 degrees temperature. So going there, the field-based studies and doing field-based studies, it is not feasible because first of all, reaching there is very difficult and laborious, due to the hostile terrain conditions. And another one is there are more number of glacial lakes. 10,000 glacial lakes are there. So going there, only few glacial lakes are approachable. And let us say out of 10,000, maybe 100 glacial lakes may be approachable. Beyond that, it is not at all approachable. This one. So it is not possible through the field studies, and moreover it is time consuming and financially unsustainable also, because what happens, you cannot go and map the glacial lakes frequently. So remote sensing here offers the alternate as well as the best alternative to detect and monitor the glacial lakes continuously. Why it is offering it is best is because it offers the data in terms of visible region to microwave region of the electromagnetic spectrum. Whatever we are able to see in our naked eye, yet in addition to that, we can also see the lakes and the glaciers in near infrared region, in terms of thermal region, in terms of microwave region. Those informations, when you combine, you can able to map very accurately the glacial lakes and the surrounding features. So that is one. And moreover, they are also like due to the availability of plenty of satellites and nowadays, the frequency of mapping can be increased. Maybe if I want, I can monitor the glacial lakes every 10 days also, even every 5 days also I can monitor. There are new satellite missions have been launched, but those cannot be done using the field data. Then another also, if I want to create a historical database from 1970s onwards, I can do the glacial lake monitoring and how the lakes have been evolved. So these are one of the things now, especially with the free access to the Landsat archive. So it has revolutionized the earth science studies. The acquisition rates and the spatial resolution of other sensors also have increased dramatically in the recent years, thus enabling the improved time series analysis. So also it increased the frequent multi-temporal mapping of the glacial lakes. Now let's see, we have seen about the advantages of remote sensing. Now let's see how the glacial lake mapping has been evolved when using remote sensing data. The first it started from the manual digitization. So yeah, I take the satellite data, it may be hard copy, and then I used to manually digitize this, because I interpret the satellite, how the water body will behave, how the soil particle will behave, how the snow and ice will behave. Based on my understanding of the spectral reflectance, I can identify easily, okay, this is the lake. Then I used to manually digitize the hard copy. It may be from the true or false color composites obtained created from the multispectral images. Multispectral images means the images acquired in different spectral regions, blue, green, and red, or it may be green, red, and NIR, all these things. So I'm not going into detail about the remote sensing. I presume that, yeah, you have enough knowledge about the basics of remote sensing images. So now what happened, then digital images started coming. The people gone for manual digitizations, on-screen digitizations, like tracing in AutoCAD. Or in GIS digitization, same thing. So you do it in over the satellite images, which are in digital copies. But the manual digitization is very time consuming, but they are very accurate, provided the person who is digitizing has a good knowledge about the field. But what happened, it cannot apply for the large areas. You can just see how you can do it for 20,000, 10,000 glacier lakes. It's very, very difficult. And it is also prone to inconsistencies even when it is handled by an expert. So you may get confused due to the challenges in interpreting the satellite data and particular locations. So now the current trend is, you see, mostly they use semi-automated or automatic methods. And that because it decreases the time as well as also inconsistency. Again, semi-automatic and automatic methods are also not very accurate. Only thing is the advantage is they consume less time, but you may have to do lot of post processing, whether if it is automatic or semi-automatic. Without post processing, you cannot able to get a good accurate glacial map things. And moreover, till date, most of the studies they use optical remote sensing data, because it is very easy to, what you can say, interpret the optical data and identify the I guess the glacial lakes easily. So it is more direct. So that's why still many people have gone for optical data. Moreover, The microwave region data is also the people have used it, but again microwave data also suffers some lot of errors due to the topographic conditions, especially in the high mountain Asia, due to their steep topography and aspect, all these things. We will discuss about them very briefly in the coming slides. Now let us to understand more about the remote sensing based glacial lake mapping, we need to understand the spectral reflectance of the water body in different electromagnetic spectrum. Let's see here. This is a figure which tells about the spectral reflectance curve of a water in different electromagnetic spectrum. So the x-axis tells the different electromagnetic region wavelength, 0.5 micrometer, 1 micrometer, 2, 5, and 10 micrometers. And the y-axis tells about the reflectance pattern and the atmospheric transmission. How much incoming wave radiations are reflected back in different region, that is told in the y-axis, as well as the atmospheric window, transmission window, whether the atmosphere is open in that. Open means whether it is transparent enough in that particular region, because then only the reflected waves can come as well as go back. That also will affect. If you see here, there is the water body. It shows all these things: snow, vegetation, water, and rock. These are the common features which may surrounding a glacial lakes. Generally, vegetation may not be there in the glacial lakes, because near the glacier areas they are also called as no vegetation regions above tree line, because initially if you go to Himalayas towards the glacier, in the lower altitude you will see a lot of trees. And if you go to the middle, then you will see only the pine trees, specific trees, and then above that you will go to you will see only grass, and above that there will be it is all barren land. This will be so, but there will be presence of rocks, water, and snow and ice will be there. So we need to understand the spectral behavior of these features to effectively utilize the remote sensing data. You just see here the water. It shows this is a blue color. It shows that the high reflectance in the visible, this is the visible region, 0.4 to 0.7 micrometer is called as visible region. Because why it is called visible? Because our human eye is also sensitive to only this range of the electromagnetic spectrum, this range of the wavelengths. So it says that high reflectance in the visible region, and also high absorption in the near infrared. Near infrared is 0.7 to 0.8. There you can see here it is a high absorptions. And beyond that, what happened? Beyond NIR also the absorption is very high, but most of the satellite, especially the optical satellites, have the sensors operating in the visible and near infrared region. Some sensors have thermal region, some sensors have microwave regions, but microwave region means then it becomes a microwave satellite. Now, a single satellite does not have sensors in both microwave as well as in optical because of the design constraints. So mostly we will be using the visible region and the NIR region, and maybe the shortwave IR region if the band is available. Just see here this region, shortwave IR region, and only these data sets for identifying the glacial lakes, because in shortwave IR the glacial lakes have been the water body. Generally the water absorbs. At the same time, if you see here comparatively the snow is reflecting more, relatively more. The reflectance of the snow is relatively more in shortwave IR region. So it will help us to distinguish between the snow and the water body. This one. Because sometimes the water may be in the frozen state, depend upon the temperature present in that. So if it is in the frozen state, that the top surface also may appear like as a snow. Then you have to identify the distinguish between the water as well as the snow. So these are all some confusions may occur on this one. And in the visible region, you can see here the snow appears white because it reflects more energy. So based on these contrasting behavior of the snow and what you can say the water, as well as just see the rocks. Rocks means you can say the soils or debris. They reflect more energy in the relatively more energy in the what you can say visible as well as in the shortwave IR region. So that's why they are appearing in different colors, and using these behaviors, the contrasting behaviors of rock, vegetation and snow in different electromagnetic regions, we can develop methods to identify the glacial lakes. in a better way. Yeah, now let's see the common method of glacial lake mapping. So glacial lake mapping, mainly people use, I'm talking about the semi-automated and automated methods. The people use indices based mapping. So one such commonly used indices is NDWI. NDWI stands for Normalized Difference Water Index. It is proven to be very efficient in mapping glacial lakes. Not only glacial lakes, mapping any open water bodies present outside the glacials also. It is helps to distinguish between the water body and non-water body. So what they use is NDWI uses green and shortwave IR on the multispectral. The formulation is green minus IR and green plus IR. If it is a water body means you will have the NDVI values very high compared to the non-water bodies. Because what happened in water bodies, it has relatively more reflection in the green and less absorption in the more absorption in the NIR. So the NDVI value and non-water body, the green will be less, NIR will be more. This one. So it ranges from -1 to +1. Generally the values. Theoretically it is possible, but more or less it varies from -0.1 to -0.9 to it will be 0.8. Like this only, it generally varies. NDVI provides the output image which is having the enhanced water features which suppresses the vegetation and other ground features simultaneously. There are other indices also there, variants of the NDVI, modified NDVI. They use a shortwave IR, because if you have the shortwave IR sensor data in your satellite, then we can use shortwave IR. If you don't have, then we have to go for NIR, which is most commonly available spectral band in the freely available, I mean, in various satellites. But there are limitations in the NDVI. The problem is especially in the mountain areas, no. So the lakes with high turbidity results in low positive values of NDWI. When you have low positive values of NDWI, you may have tend to confusion whether it is a lake or it is a snow area, all these things, or it is a rocky, the debris area. So there will be some confusions will be there. So in the mountains, will be also another problems will be that due to cloud cover also there will be a problems also. So another one, the snow cover and the shadow regions also will have low positive NDWI values. So because of this, what happened? You don't know whether it is a snow covered area, whether it is a water body area or the shadow area. So this will cause a lot of confusions in this, especially the lakes if it is having turbidity. I will show you an example. This is a satellite image, Landsat false color composite image of Sikkim acquired by, so not Landsat, it is Sentinel, acquired in 2020. So the left side shows these are the high turbid lakes and this is the low turbid lakes, very clean blue color, and this is some high turbidity is there, and this is the shadow. Now just see here the ND, if I apply the NDWI values, green minus NIR and NIR green plus NIR. Just see here the NDWI value for the shadow region is 0.20. NDWI for the high turbid lakes, it is 0.10. So that now just to see these values, the gray color and this one. Sometimes if I want to give an identify the threshold, means it's very difficult. This is also the surrounding areas and this is more or less having similar values. So close range of the NDWI values. So it is very difficult to distinguish. It causes confusion. So here comes the manual post-processing efforts. Just see here NDWI for a clear lake, that is a low turbid lake. They are very high values. I can simply say, yeah, the value is more than 0.4. Yeah, you can classify this as a water body. But if we are having low positive values, then it may tend to mix with the shadows, or it may tend to mix with the snow covers also. This one. Results in misclassification of the waters in NDWI image. So another issue with the NDWI based classification is there will be a lot of difficulty in the identification of the optimum threshold because of such problems. So now what I should do? Whether NDW value of more than 0.3 should be considered as the water body, or 0.3 or 0.1, 0.4, what? It is very difficult. There are, to solve this, to tackle these issues, there are various automated algorithms are there, the thresholding algorithms. One very popular algorithm is called Wotsu algorithm, based on the variance between the two different classes. It will identify the value which provides more variance. This one. So then that threshold value will be used for the classifying water body and non-water body using NDWA, but that also often fails in many cases because of these problems due to the cloud cover, snow cover, and the shadow, and as well as turbidity. That research is keep on going on. There are many other, there are double flexible window algorithm, Wotsu algorithm, many are there, and many times people go for manual thresholding also. That comes, this all comes under semi-automated approaches. This is the most commonly used approach for glacial lake mapping. Suppose if I take 100 studies, 75 studies will be based on NDWA and their variants maybe. So what are the other common approaches for glacial mapping? Especially if you see, these are all focused on the only optical data. Modified NDWA. Modified NDWA, they uses green and the SWIR information, provided if you have the SWIR band in your satellite data which you are considering, or simple band ratio between green and blue ratios. But they are not going to work every time. And what happens sometimes, to do post processing to our, and then people go for topographic data for filtering, because normally the lake will be formed in a depression which is having mild slopes. If it is steep slopes like this, for example, the lake will not form because it is not geomorphologically suitable area. So the lake should be like in a mild slope areas. So I will use the digital elevation models, and I'll say, okay, if the slope is more than 5% or 10 degrees something, then these areas, if you, even though the NDWA identifies this as a water body, but introducing the slope criteria, I can say this area cannot be belong to a lake area, so I can filter it. So use of such ancillary data, like they go for decision trees also. It will be step by step. Initially, I will go for NDSI, identify the snow and non-snow area, and then again I will go for NDWI, and then I use the ancillary data like topographic data to filter this. So there, if you use all these kind of step by step things, it comes under the decision tree kind of approaches. And another approach is object-oriented classifications. That is possible with the use of high resolution data. All these things. These are some of the common methods, but mostly people use the NDWI and automated or semi-automated or manual thresholding and other variants of NDWI, and then they use these NDSI, ancillary data, topographic data, to post-processing the outputs obtained from the indices-based approach. Because without post-processing, no algorithm can give accurate glacial lake distributions. So these are some of the common ways we can say. Next comes the recent trends. So what are the recent trends? There are two ways. Two different trends are there. Two categories of, two directions of trends. One is going for machine learning, and another one is machine learning involves like support vector machines, random forest, ANN, all these things. And another one is another direction of recent trends are using Google Earth Engine. So people might have heard about the Google Earth Engine. So this will be for data, computational efficiency. Google Earth Engine based studies is towards achieving the computational efficiency, and the machine learning based studies is towards achieving the good accuracy. There are two different directions, the trends in remote sensing of glacial lakes nowadays. We will see one by one what are those, how they are impacting. The recent trends, as I told, it is machine learning. There are some studies based on the random forest and support vector machines for glacial lake mapping. So at least I am showing you some 3 studies which are for different regions. the Wangchuk and Boltz. If you see, all these studies are published in 2020s, very recent studies. Before that, there are sporadic 1 or 2 studies will be there. So they have all covered high mountain Asia, Andes, it is in South America, and then Alps. And another study by Driscoll and others in 2020, they cover the Antarctic supraglacial lake. They only monitor the supraglacial lakes. This one. And Way and others in 2020 in Proceedings of National Academy of Science, PNAS America, they cover the glacial lakes of Himalayas. So if you see here, there also you can see one study is about supraglacial lakes only. They didn't monitor about the proglacial lakes. Another 2 studies, they are talking about the glacial lakes, which may include both supraglacial as well as the proglacial lakes. So that is also another research. So how to distinguish between the different types of glacial lakes, that is still challenging. Identification of glacial lake itself is a challenge, but it has been now reached to a better level. But classification of glacial lakes using remote sensing is still evolving. So people have used random forest and machine learning like support vector. There are another new studies are there, which is also published in 2020, where they have also gone for glacial lakes of Himalayas and Tibet. They have used deep learning. It is again a subset of, you can say, the machine learning, where they go for it's based on, you can say, advanced ANN, advanced artificial neural networks. So these efforts are towards improved classification of the glacial lakes or identification of the glacial lakes. There is another recent trend, or you can say another trend of remote sensing of lakes is using the Google Earth Engine. Google Earth Engine is nothing but it's a cloud-based platform. It's relatively very new platform that harnesses the cloud computing. So what happened? Cloud computing means to analyze the massive quantities of geospatial data. You don't need to download all the images in your computer and do all the calculations. That means you need to download it. For that you need good internet and take a lot of time, and then you have to do all the processing in your computer, which requires a huge memory as well as storage memory as well as the processing memory. That is like out of fashion. 10 years before people were doing it. Not even 10 years before, even 5 years before people were doing it for. If I want to do for glacial lake mapping for entire Himalayas means I would have done like that only. Now the Google Earth Engine offers you the cloud-based computing platform where you don't need to download any data. You can do all the processing in the cloud, provided if you have a good internet connectivity. And Google Earth Engine also has the enormous amount of data available from various space agencies, specifically from NASA as well as the European Space Agency. They have the database of the Landsat series data, Sentinel-1, 2 and the dataset, Aster datasets and MODIS datasets. They are all available for rapid processing without downloading to your local computer. So if I want to do for the glacial lake mapping for even for not for the entire Himalayas, even for Western Himalayas, even for an Himachal Pradesh states, if I'm interested, if I'm a part of an Himachal Pradesh state remote sensing center, I may be interested only in there. So in that case also going to downloading all the data, all this thing will take time. But you can use Google Earth Engine, this one. Well, only some disadvantages may be you may not have access to the data from commercial software, commercial satellites like PlanetScope, WorldView, Iconos, all these things you may not have. Right now it is not available, but it may come in future. And similarly, the Indian satellites, the Indian remote sensing satellites such as Cartosat series, all these things. So you currently don't have access through the Google Earth Engine. It may come, or Indian ISRO may come up with a similar platform in the future. But with the available data itself, we can do a lot of work. The available free data sets itself, we can do a lot of work. So the advantages is mainly it's a remarkable computation speed, as processing is outsourced to Google servers. You can have a simple desktop computer, i5 processor is sufficient, and you can do it for mapping of entire Himalayas, even entire world also. So what is Google Earth Engine? It brings together the satellite worlds of satellite imagery and make it available online with many tools also. Nowadays, there are a lot of algorithms are also being implemented and available in open source. So you don't need to develop some new algorithms also, like you don't need to develop code also. Suppose if I want to do implement the NDWI, then there are already codes available for specifically for working in Google Earth Engine. So you have to just access those tools and do some little bit programming, and you can easily do the processing. Not only for NDWA, where other indices and machine, like if you want to apply the machine learning, also you can apply through the Google Earth Engine. Also, if you want to apply the, for example, this supervised classification, like maximum likelihood classifications, again that also can be implemented on the Google Earth Engine. All these things. So since you have that plenty of data and from variety of sources, what happens? So you can detect. You can also use this data to detect the changes, map the trends, and also the quantify on the differences. What is happening on this? All these things in the cloud. It has a lot of applications, including not only glacial lakes. You can use it for deforestation, classifying the land cover, all these things. Now you don't need to complain. Yeah, I don't have a big computer server or anything, so I can't do this. You can simply use the Google Earth Engine, and it is free. That's another thing. Similar to Google Earth Engine, the Amazon also they are having called Amazon Web Server, web service, AWS, but that is a paid one. They have some other data sets also you can do. So now we'll see what are the other studies available in the Google Earth Engine. So these studies mainly focused on improving the computational efficiency. If you see, they also adapted the methods like indices based only, MNDWI, NDWI, and then they used NDSI and DEM, all this thing. They implemented the methods earlier adapted in a normal desktop, but in a cloud platform. These are all mainly towards achieving the computational efficiency, but using machine learning is towards achieving the accuracy. There are two directions you can see the recent trends. And all these things are, if you see, from 2017 onwards only they have done, and just see the extent of the study. So the images they have used. So that is the power of Google Earth Engine. You can see they have used 40,000 images to cover high mountain Asia from 2008 to 2017. And for Tibetan Plateau, they have used nearly 3,500. And just see the sugar and others in 2020, they have done it for glacial mapping. The first slide which I have shown, the distribution of glacial lakes. They are told about, they have used about nearly 250,000 Landsat image, only Landsat images covering the entire world, and to study the glacial lake evolution from 1990 to 2018. So that is the power of Google Earth Engine. Yeah. So now let us see what are the other challenges in the remote sensing, the optical remote sensing of glacial lake, especially the interpretation of the glacial lakes, interpretation of the satellite images to identify the glacial lakes. Either it can be a Google Earth Engine or it can be the indices based the traditional approaches also. What are those challenges? Then only once you know, then only we can go try to find out the new methods. Mainly the challenges are due to the cloud cover. You just see here, this is the clouds appearing as also will also appear as a white, and snow ice and also will appear as a white. So now you don't know whether there is any lake present on this area, because the clouds will completely obstruct what is present below that in the optical region. This is one of the major drawback of the optical region. Though if satellite remote sensing offers the best alternative in detection of glacial lakes, they especially in the optical lake, especially in mountains, no, the cloud cover causes a lot of things. And next, another in the issue in the mountains is about the shadows. The mountain shadows, no, due to the aspect, all this thing, the shadows also will what you can say affect our interpretation skills. Just see here. Now, if you are a very novice person, you may appear the whatever marked in the green boundary. You may also mark that as a what you can say glacial lake, because it looks like the water body. It is appearing dark. This one, so you may say simply you can say it is a. You will say there is a what you can say the glacial lake, but actually it is a shadow. So the one peculiar to the shadow is you can see the mirror image near to that. So from that we can easily identify, okay, this is a shadow. Just by experiences only we can come up and identify. If you want to go for visual interpretation, yeah, this is shadow or this is the lake or other water body, whatever you are intended. Shadow also obstructs, but the shadow pattern can be easily identified because you can see the mirror. Another is the turbidity. you can just see here the two kind of lakes. This is a very clean lake with bluish water. This is a lot of turbid is present. These two lakes also will cause us what you can say different means will have a differences in their reflectance behavior, which affects your NDVI or NDWI based classifications are simple. If you are using optical data, then you will have a lot of problems. So because of this, what happened? The behavior of each lake is different due to the presence of amount of sediment concentrations, all these things, and then steep terrain, all these things. Let us demonstrate. Let us see the effect of shadow in glacial lake mapping in Sikkim, which we have recently carried out. This is based on our own work. You just see here in this figure A, there is a mixing of the shadow and the what you can say the glacial lake. The glacial lakes are marked in yellow, and the shadow is in this one. Any new person, they will simply say, okay, this is also appear same. And even if you apply NDWI also, it will give you similar reasons only, because the values will be very close. It may, let us say the value of this will be, let us say in this 0.1 means here also it is 0.8 something. So just see here another problem issue is there is no presence of glacial lake, but the shadow region is appearing as a glacial lake. This is the thing. If I am using it in a different color composites, just see the shadows also appearing as a glacial lake. So these are some of the what you can say the problems. And then the clouds. This in a clear sky conditions, you can see the lakes, but in cloudy conditions, you can see for the same area in October month only, but it is completely covered with the clouds. So these are the major issues in what you can say optical remote sensing. But now what happened, due to the availability of many satellites, and so the frequency has increased. Suppose one day if you are having cloud, the next day at least you may get some data if it is provided clear data. So that way optical remote sensing, though it has challenges, it has still scope also. So what is the other way? We can go for try the SAR remote sensing of glacial lakes. SAR means microwave, synthetic aperture radar. But it solves some of the problems of the optical, but it also has its own problem. So we can't say that SAR remote sensing is the best or optical remote sensing is the best. Both has its own advantages and limitations. Overview. Now, if you see here, I'm not going to discuss about the SAR based glacial lake mapping, because I also don't have any much expertise on SAR remote sensing of glacial lakes. And moreover, it also, the reason is we didn't found it very attractive because of the inherent data noise present in the SAR data. So major advantage of the SAR data is here, it will overcome the problem of cloud cover, because in the microwave region, the signals will penetrate through the clouds. I can still see the features which is present below the clouds. That way it is good. So then some studies have shown that there are encouraging results of using the SAR data for improved glacial lake. That also depends upon the location. However, the main drawback of the SAR data is topography induced effects and speckle noise. That is still a challenging task, and especially this is a major problem in region like Himalayas, where the topography is very steep and undulating topography and very dynamic one. Now dynamic means a very undulating, you can say. But if you are looking for glacier lakes in Antarctica or Arctic, all these things, no, and there what happened, the topography is comparatively gentle. So in that case, SAR may be very good, because there the cloud cover is almost permanent, you can say. It like throughout the year the cloud cover will be dominant. In there the problem of means the using optical data will be more problematic. If you see one of my slide, I mentioned in red dots, these areas the glacial lake mapping has not been done because of non-availability of the appropriate data. That is due to the cloud cover. There we can use SAR data, because that will overcome, and also the topography is comparatively mild than the Himalayas, mainly because of this, because of the topography induced errors. So it is very challenging, and also analyzing the SAR data is complex. It's not straightforward like a optical data. So still, that's why many people prefer optical data. But what happened if depend upon the situation, If you really not having any data, then we have to go for SAR data and try to combine. These are the what you can say the recent trends and the new the future way forward. Let us see one example of SAR data, how they have used this one. So now they have a recent study by Sonam Wangchuk and Tobias Bolch. They have done a mapping of glacial lakes using Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2 and random classifier. Sentinel-1 is, you can say, is a microwave data. Sentinel-2 is a what you can say, it's a optical data. They combined these two. Just see how they have got this data set, how the lakes are appearing in Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2. This is the false color composite, and this is the Sentinel-2 image. This is the Sentinel-1. And what happened now in microwave imagery, you need to take into account also the polarization effects. Suppose no, the HH polarization, VV polarization, HV polarization. So that means the orientation of the microwave, the electromagnetic signals. Those concepts will not come in the optical remote sensing data. Even though microwave data, the HH polarization image will behave differently, will appear differently than HV polarization. That also you need to consider. So it is very complex. I'm not going to detail about the SAR data characteristics and all these things because I don't have expertise also in this much. You can see here the turbidity levels also and how they are appearing in the microwave data. So what happened? You can see the differences here. These are all in the Bhutan. They have used random forest. So what they found is they found that the method gives good accuracy for more than 90% approximately by overcoming the challenges of the turbidity, frozen state, and the cloud cover. For all these purposes, it can be overcome. And there is another study also where they have used Sentinel-1 SAR imagery for the Antarctica region. They have also used deep learning techniques. They have used convolution deep learning, and their results shows that the kappa coefficient is approximately like what you can say 0.95. That means your classification method is 92% better than the random classification. See, this is the image acquired in 2020, and this is the final output. The classified glacial lakes of this one Antarctica using the same this people have done. So now with this, what happened? We got some idea like how the SAR data is also being people are started using it, but it has its own challenges. So now let's see what are the future scope. The future scope is that we need to explore the SAR data. Some few studies started exploring the SAR data. They have developed some methods to overcome to reduce the noise and the topographic effects to some extent, and then they have also achieved success. So SAR data needs to be exploited in the glacial lakes mapping, and especially in the Himalayan high mountain range Asia regions, the only using SAR data may not again be better than the optical data. So we have to go for data fusion between optical data and SAR data. Whenever you don't have what you can say the cloud images due to cloud cover or effects due to shadow or the turbidity, we can go for SAR. So we have to combine the strengths of optical and the SAR data and enhance their efficiency. The other thing is we need to go for machine learning based algorithms, because nowadays you are getting high resolution images, so we can easily identify using a naked eye and train the algorithms also. So that is also shown good initial results. It also needs to be explored. There are different machine learning. Here I have shown only support vector machine and random forest. So maybe artificial neural network within the random forest, there are various sub methods are also available, approaches are also available. That needs to be explored to get an idea which method is better. Maybe particular method may be better for a particular region. The next another option is due to the availability of the high spatial and temporal resolution data from the company called PlanetScope. So we can try for object-based image analysis. This is very common approach in dealing with high resolution remote sensing data sets. So the same thing can be applied to glacial lakes for the high resolution images obtained from PlanetScope, and it is free for academic researchers. Per month, up to 5,000 square kilometers of data will be free. You have to only register in their website and get. And you know, the best advantage is every 3 days or 2 days you will get the image. The resolution is 5 meter. Free of cost, and you will get every 2 days or 5 days. I don't remember. Every two days or 5 days, and it is the resolution is 5 meter. But one disadvantage is they don't have the data in SWIR range. They have the data only in the visible region and the near infrared region. They don't have in thermal region and SWIR region. So some of the methods may not be possible to apply. This is right now. This is the current status of this. Another one is we can go towards the handling the data efficiency. We can go for cloud-based platforms like Google Earth Engine. So you can handle a lot of data, and you can do a lot of analysis like time series analysis, as well as you can extend the study for large spatial area also. These are some of the future scopes you can, or you can combine what you can say this one. Sorry, nothing. Yeah, I got wrong. So these data sets, no, these approaches can be implemented in freely available data sets. You don't need to depend on the what you can say the commercial satellite imageries. With this itself, we can achieve good. Maybe then you have to addition to the fusion of the optical data and SAR data, we can also combine the ancillary data like topography. Nowadays, you are getting a better resolution topographic, the DEMs also over Himalayas. For example, the TantamX, the TerraSire mission TantamX, they have released a DEM of 10 meter resolution recently. So that also can be used. Earlier, people used SRTM, which is a 50 meter resolution, and accuracy is also plus or minus 15 to 17, 20 meters. But now the TantamX, they have provided 10 meter resolution, and with the resolution of approximately 7 to 10 meters over the Himalayas. So when you use such ancillary data, high quality data, again with the combination of data fusion, we can achieve very high quality results. This one. So this is the future scope. So of the glacial lake mapping. So with this, I conclude my talk. If you have any doubts, you can please ask me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. I hope the participants have learned a few things, many things from your talk. You discussed the very basics of glacial mapping, glacial lakes mapping, as well as you showed some case studies in which how exactly the work were done. So now I request the participants to please unmute themselves and ask the queries to Dr. Ramshankaran, or they can also put their queries in the chat box. So I've allowed the mics. You can please unmute your mics. And
at the one thing I just want to mention also, recently I have seen the report by Central Water Commission, Government of India. They have also mapped the glacial lakes in within the Indian Himalayas, but they have used manual digitization. Still, it is they are I can say very they are lacking very much in the implementation of the recent trends. Also, they have done manual digitization using Indian satellite data. Just recently in 2020, they have prepared this report. So these are all not very efficient ways. And accuracy, they are also claiming similarly of other studies also. So better to go for semi-automated methods, because automated methods are not suitable here, because semi-automated methods involves the subjectivity also. The experts also will involve and improve the decisions.
Okay, so any queries from the participants? Okay, till then, sir, there is one query from my side. I'm not, I don't have any expertise in data fusion. So I just wanted to know, are there any standard methods if you want to combine the data from optical remote sensing and SAR imagery?
Yeah, actually there are various approaches are there. For example, what I can say is they may be using only the one band of SAR data, means not SAR data, one band of the optical data and combined with the satellite means SAR data, or they use only the spatial resolution of the SAR data and the spectral information, the reflected, the emitted information from the SAR data. Depend upon the purpose, no, what characteristics I'm going to fusion. I may fuse the spatial resolution, or I may take the spectral information. So there are various ways are there.
Okay. So I saw some of the publications in which they try to correlate various SAR parameters with the optical parameters. They combine all the polarizations, some ratios of the polarizations. So are there any standard methods as well for this?
No, I don't have any idea about this because I'm mostly working on optical remote sensing, and we use some data about the thermal data because to identify the frozen state, to differentiate between the frozen state and the non-frozen state. Because it is only snow, it may be slightly, the temperature may be comparatively lesser than the water body. So based on this, so I don't have expertise in SAR based glacial lake mapping. We are just going to explore.
And so what about the finest resolution thermal data that is available free of cost?
Landsat data, I think it is of 100-meter resolution. And I think Aster data is also there, but they have only the Aster data resolution wise it is better, but they have only one thermal band.
Okay.
Landsat has two thermal bands, Landsat 8 series.
I think Landsat is also giving the resample to 30 meters as well, I think.
Yeah. So, but almost even if you resample anyway, you won't get a it's like new information. Right. Only it's a resample.
Right.
This one. Moody's is also there. That is 100 meters. So it's not 100. It's 1 kilometer.
1 kilometer.
1 kilometer.
Okay, we have a query in the chat box as well, sir. So I'll read out the query from the chat box. So Mr. Jagdish Tati is asking you, can you please provide some links where we can download labeled Landsat or Sentinel-2 data?
Yeah, labeled Landsat means I couldn't understand. That means classified Landsat, it won't be available. That we have to do classification. Only Landsat and Sentinel data you can download from the just type Landsat NASA, you will get it. Similarly, Sentinel-2 ESA, European Space Agencies, it will direct you to the European Space Agency site and you can download it.
I think Mr. Jagdish, we have already covered this when we talked about how to download the, for training the model he is mentioning.
No, actually the training the model, that's what you can go for the Google Earth engine, the Google Earth images where they also have high resolution images also. So used on that you have to train. Okay, identify this is the manually you have to collect the training sample. There is no Landsat labeled Landsat or Sentinel data available freely.
Okay, so next query is from Dr. Ganesh Bhatt, and I think you have already answered it during your session. Why is microwave remote sensing preferred over optical remote sensing in glacial studies?
Yeah, forget about glacier. In any studies in earth sciences, microwave data is preferred to avoid the cloud cover. If you are having cloud cover during, let us say, if I want to do for flood mapping or glacial mapping, if it is covered by cloud on that day of imaging, then optical data cannot be identified, cannot be used to map the areas. So only what you can say is microwave data will provide you the appropriate information. Be used, and also has another thing, microwave data also, for example, has different interactions. The way it interacts with the earth surface features are also different, sometimes which you are not able to identify. For example, I told you about the turbid lakes and the non-turbid lakes, also clear lakes. If you use in a glacial times, it will be difficult, but in the microwave it will have a different interactions, so you may able to easily identify it. That's all. It has some, but at the same time, it also has some disadvantages in the Himalayan terrains due to the topography natures.
Next question from another question, which is any software which are available to get the classified images?
Classified images, like no, okay, so you want to do any classification. So you can do simple classifications even in QGIS because they offer maximum likelihood classifications. And then there is also Veka softwares out there. It is mainly they have implemented the machine learning algorithms. You don't need to do any coding, but you can go. Yeah, NV and other things are proprietary. NV, ERDAS, Imagine, they are all proprietary. Even MATLAB can be used. This one. Yeah, Dr. Ganesh have asked about is there any other reasons also other than cloud cover? So, for example, in a microwave, especially if I'm using for glacier studies, it incorporates various things: glacier mapping, then glacier lake mapping, glacier topography development of the topography, and another one is glacier velocity studies. Various studies out there. For each studies, each data has their own advantages and disadvantages. For example, if I want to go for glacier velocity mapping, microwave has good accuracy for short temporal period. For example, every 10 days, 15 days, no, I can do based on interferometer techniques, we can estimate the velocity, but I cannot do that using the optical data. But if I want to go for a yearly velocity means I can still go for optical data, which is much easier. So if I am going for, let us say the snow characteristics, snow density, snow depth, and then snow water equivalent, snow moisture, all these things, then microwave is, which will be more suitable, because in optical data you cannot distinguish these characteristics very easily. That is the limitation of the optical data, because microwave data responses, what you can say, varies depending upon the condition of the snow. If it is wet, it will be different. If it is, and also microwave, you can also estimate the snow depth. But in optical remote sensing data, you cannot estimate the snow depth, just optical remote sensing image. But that way, and similarly for the DEM also, DEM creation also, the microwave data is more accurate than the optical data, because optical data has their own disadvantages, the stereo pairs, all these things. So depend upon the purpose of the study, you can choose either microwave data or the what you can say the optical data. For glacial mapping, glacial outline mapping. In that case, what happens? The debris and non-debris areas. What happened? That also will be like creating a lot of confusion, because what happened now? There will be glacial lakes. There will be glaciers which is covered by the debris. Below the debris, there will be ice will be present, and outside that, and just after the glacier ends, no, that also will be appearing as a debris, rock kind of material, soil materials only. Distinguishing these two, whether it is within the part of the glacier or outside the part of the glacier, the debris cover, it is very difficult in optical data. So some people, they started using the temperature data, because in temperature data, below the debris, if the ice is present means, then that the temperature will be relatively lesser than the outside the area where no ice will be present below the debris. They try to use, but in microwave you don't need to fuse the temperature data. These two will have a different pattern of emittance, so you can comparatively easily delineate the glacier terminus areas in microwave. It all depends upon the study area and the purpose. You have to choose the data set.
Thank you, sir. Any further queries? You can please unmute yourself if you have any queries.
And moreover, in microwave remote sensing, especially for glacier mapping and other things, I may not able to answer all the questions, because our major work focuses on, you can say, optical remote sensing data. Now only slowly I am also learning about microwave remote sensing applications in glaciers.
Yes, Dr. Ane Best, do you have any query? You're unmuted. Okay, so I think we can wait for a couple of minutes to see whether there are any queries, any further queries.
Sure, sure.
Good morning, sir. Sam Sirshad speaking, sir. Sir, So I really found your presentation wonderful, sir, because you've given us a lot of research gap areas and the limitations. Sir. My most of the queries, sir, was always on shadows and clouds. And I think that is always going to be a problem after hearing your sentence. It's always going to be a problem. So, and especially in high mountain areas, I've also seen the bare soil also giving a lot of problems because vegetation and bare soil also gives a problem. Sir. So my question, sir, last is, when you worked in the Himalayan data, sir, is there any time frame that you'd suggest so that we can download to get the best data when you're downloading the satellite images?
It's a very good question. I have somehow forgot to tell about that. Yeah, the time frame when you are going looking for glacier mapping, glacier studies means the suitable time frame is from June to October, because in glaciology there is a time like you are having a calendar year. Similarly, the glaciological year, hydrological year, all are different years are there. So in the glaciological year means it starts from October 1st to theoretically October 1st to September 30th in the tropical regions, even in the Alps also. Because the reason is that from October 1 onwards, the accumulation starts. That means snowfall will start. Not exactly on October 1, but theoretically October 1 accumulation starts, and it will keep on going up to March, April, May also sometimes. Then from June onwards, the melting season starts. And in August and September, no, there will be peak melting and the glaciers will be exposed. Otherwise, if you see, if you see the same glacier in the month of November, you cannot identify the glacial lake, even in the microwave also. Maybe the subglacial lakes possible because of interferometry technique, that I'm not going now. For if you want to identify the glacial lakes, even the glacier boundary, anything, debris, all these things, if you take an image on November, after the peak snowfall season there, it all will be appearing only as a snow, because all completely covered by the snow. But the same area, if you take an image between August and September, this one. So more depend upon the melting status, the glaciers will be, that sometimes partial glacier will be exposed, or sometimes will be full glaciers will be exposed. And the melting season, what I end know, there is an area called accumulation area. Only at those areas you will have the permanent snow will be there. Below that areas you will see only the ice, exposed ice. All the snow would have been melted. That's why they call ablation area. So all the snow will be melted, and then once the snow is melted, then if it is only there will be only regions where ice is present directly below the snow, then ice will be seen. And if there is a debris below the snow, then the debris will be seen. And there are two types of like debris. One is within the part of the glacier, one is outside the part of the glacier. Debris, then below that ice will be there. That they comes under the within this glacier zone. That is the lowest portion of the glacier. And after the glacier, immediately again debris will be there. Again, what happened? Below that is no ice will be there. This is outside of the glaciers. So during the August and September time, sometimes October, this is the appropriate time to map the glaciers. And it is this is the time you have to search for the non-cloud cover images.
Thank you so much, Shirshak, for your query. It is always, during the whole FDP, it has been a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you, sir. So any further queries? Okay, so if there are no further queries, so I would like to thank Dr. Ramshankaran once again. Thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation. And thank you so much for the wonderfully elaborated presentation. Actually, I have very limited idea of glacial studies, but after your presentation was so well explained that now I have got at least I know the basics of how we can go for a glacial mapping using optical data.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for listening to my talk. I hope it might have given you some insights about the remote sensing for glacial lakes. I could not cover entire things. I assume that you know some basics of remote sensing, and based on that assumption, I have proceeded. And yeah, I hope it might have given you some interest in remote sensing of glacial lakes and some insights about the limitations and the future scope. Thank you. Yeah, I will share the PPT.